What can happen from blind love? Keep watching. I remember the first time I saw her. Sophia stood on stage, bathed in the golden light of the theater. Her dress flowed like water, catching the light with every movement, and her smile, it could melt even the hardest of hearts. Time seemed to slow as if the world paused just for her. Every man in the audience was captivated. So was I. But unlike the others, somehow, by a twist of fate, I became the one she noticed. Our first conversation plays in my mind like a bittersweet melody, me, stumbling over my words, awkward and shy, while she, so confident, laughed softly at my nervous stuttering. But her laugh wasn't cruel. It was warm, inviting, like a door opening to a world where I belonged. It made me feel safe, wanted. I fell hard and fast, faster than I ever imagined possible. Sophia was everything I had dreamed of in a woman. Talented, kind, her beauty was almost otherworldly, a beauty that even I, as an artist, struggled to capture on canvas. But I tried. Oh, how I tried. In her I found the perfect muse. Her presence fueled my work in ways I never thought possible. Every day, I painted her, Sophia in soft light, Sophia in the garden, Sophia in bed, her hair tousled, her skin glowing in the morning sun. Each brushstroke was filled with admiration, each painting an expression of love. When we got married, I thought I'd won life's greatest lottery. Our wedding was small, intimate, exactly how she wanted it. It's just us that matters, she told me, and I believed her with all my heart. The first year of marriage was a dream I never wanted to wake from. Every morning, I woke to her beside me, and for a few minutes, I'd just watch her sleep, the morning sun casting a golden hue on her skin, making her look ethereal. How did I get so lucky? I often wondered. We were happy. At least I thought we were. But even then, in those early days, tiny cracks were forming, small, almost invisible at first. Sophia had her life at the theater, and I had mine in my studio. It was easy to lose ourselves in our separate worlds. When she stayed late for rehearsals, I reassured myself it was just part of her job. Actors had strange hours after all. But there was a small voice inside me, whispering something I didn't want to hear. She would come home late, sometimes well past midnight, her dress carrying the faint scent of wine and perfume. Rehearsals ran long, she'd say with a sheepish grin, as if rehearsing well into the night was perfectly normal. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was being paranoid. She loves me, I reminded myself over and over. Doesn't she? Sophia was everything to me, my muse, my partner, the love of my life. I silenced that nagging voice, buried it deep, and carried on with what I thought was our perfect life. But the night started to feel longer. Sophia would leave for the theater in the late afternoon, her goodbye kisses hurried, her mind seemingly somewhere else. She still looked as beautiful as ever, her hair tied in a loose bun, her lips painted that perfect shade of red she always wore before a performance. But there was something different about her eyes, something distant. It was as if she was slipping away from me, a stranger slowly taking the place of the woman I once knew. I tried not to dwell on it. I buried myself in my work, but with every painting, I felt the weight of something unspoken between us. The brush that once captured her beauty effortlessly now felt heavy in my hand. My strokes were slower, more labored. Sophia, once painted as a goddess, now appeared on my canvas as a shadow, a figure just beyond my reach. It was as though the light she once radiated had begun to dim, little by little, with each passing day. Yet I couldn't stop. I kept painting her, desperate to recapture the woman I had fallen in love with. Sophia, framed in golden sunlight, her laugh echoing in my memory, her eyes full of that playful spark I once adored. But no matter how hard I tried, the images came out wrong. I was painting a memory of someone who no longer existed. The house felt emptier when she wasn't around. Sometimes, I'd sit by the window with a glass of whiskey in hand, waiting for the sound of her keys in the door. Midnight would pass, Then one, then two, and still, the only company I had were the shadows stretching across the floor, creeping in from the corners of the room. When she did come home, she glided through the door, her perfume lingering in the air, her face flushed from the night. Rehearsals ran late, she would say again, the same tired excuse. I wanted to believe her, I needed to believe her. But the way she avoided my gaze, the slight tremor in her voice, it sent a chill down my spine. Sometimes, I'd ask her about the theater, about the director, her castmates, anything to fill the growing silence. She'd smile, but her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. "Oh, they're fine," she would say, her tone vague, brushing past me like a breeze, always eager to escape to the bedroom. I told myself it was just the stress of her career. The theater was demanding, draining. But deep down I knew better. The nights had begun swallowing her whole, and I was powerless to stop it. One evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a half-finished bottle of whiskey, the silence in the house became unbearable. The ticking clock mocked me with each second that dragged on, slower and slower. I glanced at the time. It was past 1 in the morning, and she still hadn't come home. I stared across at the empty chair where she should have been, my mind swirling with the whispers I had been trying to ignore for so long. The doubts I had buried deep began to claw their way to the surface. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong, but I had been too much of a coward to confront it. That night, the tension finally snapped. I don't know what compelled me. Maybe it was the way she had avoided my eyes that morning, or how cold her goodbye had felt when she left for yet another late rehearsal. Maybe it was something in her voice, something absent. Whatever it was, I made up my mind. I would go to the theater. I told myself it was just a surprise visit, an innocent attempt to see her in her element. Maybe it was my last, desperate grasp at whatever fragile thing remained between us. The drive felt surreal, as if the city lights were part of some strange, blurry dream. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have. By the time I arrived, the streets were eerily quiet, the front doors of the theater locked. For a moment, I hesitated, debating whether to turn back and forget this foolish idea. But the gnawing feeling in my gut refused to let me walk away. I found a side entrance, left ajar, and slipped inside. The theater was dark, save for a faint glow coming from backstage. My footsteps echoed through the emptiness, the sound bouncing off faded posters and forgotten set pieces. With every step down the narrow hallway, a heavy weight settled in my chest, as if I was moving through thick, suffocating fog. She's just rehearsing, I told myself, trying to silence the hollow ache inside. Practicing lines, blocking scenes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I reached the director's office and stopped. From behind the door, I heard voices. Muffled at first, but then a laugh. Not just any laugh, her laugh. The sound that once warmed me now sent a cold shiver down my spine. My hand hovered over the door handle, trembling. A voice in my head screamed for me to walk away. But before I could think, I pushed the door open. There she was, Sophia, tangled in the arms of the theater director, their faces inches apart, oblivious to my presence. For a moment, the room spun around me, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. My heart pounded in my chest, the betrayal crashing over me like a wave. They didn't notice me at first, not until I stumbled forward, knocking into a chair. The sound jolted them apart, their heads snapping toward me in shock. Sophia's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling with the weight of 1,000 unsaid words, but I couldn't hear her over the blood roaring in my ears. For a moment, the world froze. All I could feel was the betrayal, the years of trust, the love I had poured into our life together, shattered in a single heartbeat. My gaze locked onto the director. He stood there, frozen like a deer caught in headlights, his hands still lingering where they shouldn't have been. A coward. He didn't even have the decency to move. "Get out," I growled, my voice unrecognizable, a deep, guttural sound torn from somewhere primal inside me. The director didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket, his eyes flicking nervously between us, and fled the room without another word, disappearing into the darkness of the theater. His cowardice only fueled the fury boiling in my veins. Now it was just us. I turned to Sophia, my chest heaving with the weight of heartbreak and rage swirling together in a violent storm. "How long?" I demanded, my voice sharp, barely able to contain the tidal wave of emotions threatening to consume me. Her face crumpled. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched, but I recoiled, her touch suddenly repulsive. I couldn't bear to feel her skin against mine. "Daniel, It wasn't Daniel, it's not what you think. Not what I think." I spat, my voice trembling as I ran my hands through my hair. "I think I just saw my wife with another man. What else should I think?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but it didn't matter. Any love or tenderness I had once felt for her was buried under the crushing weight of her betrayal. The woman I adored was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "Get out," I whispered, the words choking in my throat. "Get out of my sight." For once, she didn't argue. She didn't try to explain or lie her way out of it. Silently, she gathered her things. The sharp echo of her heels clicking against the floor was the only sound as she left the room, leaving behind a trail of devastation. I stood there, paralyzed, in the wreckage of what had once been our life, shattered like broken glass. The house was dark when I returned later that night. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Sophia sat on the couch, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling, staring blankly at the floor. Seeing her like that stirred nothing in me. No sympathy, no compassion. Only emptiness, hollow, like the shell of a man I had become. She didn't look up when I slammed the door behind me. The silence between us thickened, suffocating. It hung in the air like a wall neither of us dared to break. I stood in the doorway, fists clenched at my sides, waiting for her to say something, anything, to explain herself, to justify what I had seen. But there was nothing. Finally, she looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice weak and broken. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. What was there to say? No words could change what had happened. She stood up, her legs shaky, and took a step toward me. I instinctively stepped back, the anger rising in my chest like bile. I didn't want her near me. Not anymore. "Please, Daniel," she begged, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Let me explain. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. The director, he had power over me. My career, everything I've worked for. I felt like I didn't have a choice." Her words felt hollow, rehearsed, like something she had prepared for moments like this. I stared at her, cold and unmoved, wondering how many times she had practiced this speech in her head. How long had she been preparing to lie to me? "I didn't want it to happen," she continued, her voice breaking, trying to fill the silence. "I did it for us, for our family. I was scared of what he could do to my career, to us. I thought if I kept him happy, I could protect what we had." The absurdity of her words made me sick. "For us?" I hissed, the rage bubbling to the surface again. "You're telling me you slept with him to protect us?" She nodded, her eyes wide with desperation, trying to convince me of this twisted logic. "I know it was wrong, Daniel. I know that. But I love you. I love our family. I never wanted to hurt you. I should have walked out right then. I should have left and never looked back. But there was a part of me, some small, pathetic part, that still wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that somehow the woman I had loved was still in there, buried beneath all the lies. Against my better judgment, I let her continue. I let her sob, let her wrap her arms around me as she pleaded for forgiveness. She swore it was over. She swore she would never see him again. She promised she would do anything to make it right. And I forgave her. Or at least I told myself I did. In the days that followed, life pretended to return to normal, or as normal as it could after something like that. The theater director was fired when the scandal broke, and Sophia swore that the affair was over. She claimed that she was done with the life she once clung to. For a while I let myself believe it. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that we could move forward, rebuild what had been broken. But things were different. She was different. I noticed the small things. The way she flinched when I tried to touch her. How she avoided my gaze when I asked about her day. The intimacy that once flowed between us like a river had dried up, replaced by a cold, impenetrable distance. We didn't fight, but we didn't talk either, not really. Not about anything that mattered. I tried to convince myself that we could fix this, that we could rebuild. But deep down I knew it was all an illusion. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had trusted with my heart, she was gone. And in her place was a ghost. A shadow. It was supposed to be the highlight of my career, my first solo exhibition in another city, showcasing years of work. Portraits, landscapes, and of course, the countless images of Sophia, the muse who had once filled my heart with love and my canvas with beauty. As the exhibition neared, the excitement I should have felt was nowhere to be found. The joy that once came so easily from painting had long since drained, lost in the turmoil of the past months. Each brushstroke felt mechanical, lifeless. I had planned to stay for a few days after the exhibition, meet potential buyers, attend dinners. But something gnawed at me, a sense of dread I couldn't quite explain, that pulled me home early. I didn't tell Sophia I was coming back. In some twisted way, I thought surprising her might reignite something between us. Maybe seeing her waiting for me at the door, unaware of my arrival, would bring back what we had before the lies darkened everything. Maybe I was foolish, but I needed to try. The house was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows on the walls. It was late, but not so late that she should have been in bed already. A strange unease settled in my chest as I walked through the empty hallway. My footsteps sounded louder than they should, each one echoing through the silence, unnerving me more with every step. I paused at the base of the staircase, straining to listen. Then I heard it. Laughter. Soft, low. Her laughter. A familiar knot twisted in my stomach. The same knot I had felt in the theater that night, when everything unraveled. It was like time had folded in on itself, and I was walking back into the same nightmare. Part of me wanted to turn around, leave, and never look back. But I couldn't. I had to see it. I had to face it. I moved up the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister as the laughter grew clearer. Laughter, whispered words, the unmistakable rustling of sheets. I stopped at the bedroom door, my pulse pounding in my ears. For a long moment, I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the doorknob, telling myself not to open it. Not again. But something darker, something deeper, urged me forward. I pushed the door open, and there they were, Sophia, tangled in the sheets with another man. Her skin glowed in the dim light, her lips curved into a smile I hadn't seen in months. The smile she once saved for me. But it wasn't the theater director this time. This man was younger, smug, handsome in a way that made me feel sick to my core. The world around me blurred, but this time there was no shock. No numb disbelief. Only cold, seething rage. Sophia gasped, scrambling to cover herself. But it was too late. The damage was done. The air in the room thickened. The tension so sharp I could feel it pressing against my skin. My body moved before my mind could catch up. My hands clenched as I grabbed the man by the collar, dragging him out of the bed. He barely had time to react before I pushed him up against the wall, my grip tightening. I felt the tension rise within me, a boiling storm that had been brewing for months. He stammered, his eyes wide, but I couldn't hear a word he said. My thoughts drowned in a whirl of betrayal, pain, and anger. Sophia's panicked voice echoed behind me, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't bear it anymore, the lies, the deception, all of it piling up like a weight I could no longer carry. But I couldn't let myself fall further. Not this time. Not again. I forced myself to let go, shoving the man toward the door. He stumbled wide-eyed as he hurried out of the room and disappeared down the stairs. The only thing left was Sophia, trembling, her face pale, her lips parted in shock. The woman who had torn my life apart stood before me, a ruin of everything we had once built together. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. You're a monster," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with fear. I laughed. A cold, bitter sound that didn't feel like my own. A monster? I spat, stepping closer to her. "You did this, Sophia. You destroyed everything. You killed what we had." She backed away, her hands shaking as she tried to explain, tried to justify what couldn't be justified. Daniel, I'm sorry I didn't." "Don't." I cut her off, my voice low, dangerous. "Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare pretend that any of this was a mistake." Her lips quivered, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. I had seen the truth, and no amount of pleading could erase it. I turned and left the room, leaving her standing there, the life we had once shared crumbling around her. After that night, everything changed. The man I had been, the man who once painted Sophia in the soft light of admiration, who saw love and hope in every brushstroke, was gone. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Whatever tenderness I once had, whatever belief in love and trust, had turned into something cold, distant, and unforgiving. The divorce was inevitable, but I wasn't going to let it end quietly. I wanted her to face the consequences of every lie, every betrayal. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. No more pleading, no more apologies. I was done listening to her excuses. I filed for divorce first, catching her off guard. But it wasn't just the end of our marriage I was after. I wanted everything: the house, the assets, and most importantly, full custody of the children. I used every resource I had, reached out to every lawyer and contact I knew. My goal was simple: to strip her of everything she held dear. The legal battle that followed was vicious. Sophia, once so sure of her charm and wit, struggled to stay afloat. The scandal from her affair had spread, and her once glamorous reputation began to crumble. The theater world distanced itself from her. She fought back, of course, tried to spin her stories, played the victim as she had done before. But this time, no one believed her. The sympathy she had relied on evaporated, leaving her to face the reality of her choices alone. The court hearings were exhausting, but I didn't care. I sat there, watching as she unraveled under questioning, her carefully crafted image cracking. She was no longer the enchanting woman who had captivated me all those years ago. She was just broken. And yet, as I watched her fall apart, I realized something unsettling. Her suffering brought me no relief. There was no victory in watching the woman I had once loved become a shadow of herself. The ruling was in my favor. I was granted custody of the children, the house, and the majority of our assets. Sophia was left with little, barely enough to rebuild. Her career, once the shining star of our life together, was in ruins. She was blacklisted from major theaters, unable to get a role. The very industry she had sacrificed so much for turned its back on her. She tried to rebuild, of course. She had to. But I made sure her chances were slim. I made sure that every door was closed, that her name was tainted in every circle that mattered. For every success I achieved in my art, her failures mounted. She had no one left to blame but herself. And yet, as the months passed, I began to realize something. I had won, but at what cost? One evening, I stood in my studio, staring at an unfinished painting of Sophia. The light was wrong. The colors were muted, lifeless. The inspiration that had once poured effortlessly from me had dried up. When I looked at the canvas, all I saw was her betrayal. All I felt was the bitterness that had taken root inside me, suffocating everything else. I had thought revenge would free me. I had believed that destroying her life would give me the closure I needed. But the truth was, it only left me empty. Yes, I had destroyed her. But in doing so, I had lost myself. The love I once held for her had twisted into something darker, something that consumed me from the inside out. The children stayed with me, of course. They were all I had left that felt real. But even they could sense the change in me. I wasn't the father I used to be. I was colder, more distant. I found it hard to connect with them the way I used to. Every time I looked at them, I was reminded of the life we once had, a life that had been shattered beyond repair. One evening, as I tucked them into bed, my youngest asked me a question that cut deeper than any courtroom victory ever could. "Daddy, are you happy?" I froze, staring down at her innocent face, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her yes, that everything was fine, that we were better off now. But I couldn't. "No," I whispered. "No, I'm not." She looked at me for a long moment, her small hand reaching out to hold mine. "It's okay, Daddy. You'll be happy again one day." Her words, so simple, so pure, stayed with me long after I left her room. In that moment, I realized that my pursuit of revenge had come at a cost I hadn't been prepared to pay. I had been so focused on destroying Sophia that I hadn't stopped to think about what it was doing to me. I had become something I never wanted to be: cold, ruthless, bitter. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. As I stood alone in my studio, the unfinished painting of Sophia staring back at me, I knew I had a choice to make. I could continue down this path, consumed by bitterness, or I could try to rebuild. Not for her, not for what we had lost, but for myself, for the man I used to be, and for the children who still looked at me with hope in their eyes. It wouldn't be easy. I had lost so much, more than I could ever get back. But maybe there was a way to find myself again. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe, and leave comments below.